to talk with you. So what I was imagining and thinking about this talk was a combination of some discussion from my end, some short contemplative sessions, and then time for dialogue. It's interesting in these times to have events like this. There's so much going on in people's lives, and so many challenges, actually. Sometimes it's completely overwhelming. And I think the kind of worldwide, certainly not simply US based, but worldwide situation brings out kind of a raw quality in life, which is hard sometimes not to lose heart. And it also has a wake up kind of quality as well, pointing out or almost exaggerating the kind of tendencies that we might have as individuals. So those are the kind of things that I'm hoping we can explore. I'm very concerned with how some of the views and teachings and practices within the Buddhist tradition can be of help to people generally, Buddhist or not, and can be relevant in these kind of challenges, whether it's health or environmental or justice and injustice, so many challenging issues. So the title, Cynicism and Magic, was inspired by this book a group of editors have been working on. I think, as many of you know, I've done editing for Trungpa Rinpoche's work, and my fellow editor, Carolyn Gimming, and I have been trying to work with a group of younger people to teach them how we've gone about editing these kind of Dharma teachings so that the tradition can be carried forth past our working life, or life altogether, actually. So we've been working on that, and they actually are have worked on a book that's going to be published by Shambhala publication probably in about a year, called Cynicism and Magic, or Intellect and Intuition on the Buddhist Path. So that inspired me to think about these things more, and I like the combination of the terms, putting them together. So that's what the plan is, and you're welcome to hop in and raise questions. So I wanted to start with the first cynicism, with cynicism. And generally, cynicism in modern view is extremely pessimistic, or you could almost say nihilistic. The view that humans are only motivated by self-interest, the sense of no point in doing anything because you won't get anywhere anyway, a kind of a pessimistic outlook, a naysaying outlook, fault-finding, a very pinched kind of attitude, and very strongly feeding of emotions like greed and envy and jealousy, and kind of everyone out for themselves, a very kind of Machiavellian view almost of what's going on. And I think personally that we're in an age of a lot of negative cynicism. I think fueled sometimes by despair, or when you don't see a way going forward, sometimes you can just give up, and then that can lead to lashing out in the form of this kind of negative kind of cynicism. So that's where I'd like to start, because I'm actually going to talk about a positive cynicism. But first I want to look at the negative one, because I think it is rampant. And it ties in with a really interesting Buddhist teachings of two terms of nihilism on one extreme and eternalism, what's called, on the other extreme. So I think under situations of stress, another option that some people take is kind of dreamy optimism, you know, eternalism, everything's going to be okay, everyone's going to be nice, can't we be nice? Can't we just get along? A kind of naivete, or there's going to be some magic bullet to save us. You know, the virus is just going to go away just like that, poof, according to our fearless leader. But there's the extremes. And I think a lot of us fall into one of those two extremes. And in the Buddhist teachings, you know, there's an emphasis on middle way, not falling into extremes, and really understanding those extremes, which we do kind of bounce around within, at least I do, from day to day. So before launching into discussing, you know, how could a form of cynicism be a positive thing, and certainly how could it be connected with the magic, I think we need to look at the, you know, everyday cynicism, and the extremes of nihilism, or you could say the temptation of nihilism. It's nihilism or eternalism are both forms of escape from, you know, the raw immediate experience that we're dealing with, and our sense of our social and physical, political realm that we're in, environmental. So I'd like to invite you, if you would like, to first engage in really looking into your own experience and your own tendency. I'd like to take a little bit of time for each of us to contemplate the notion of nihilism, that sense of giving up, or the sense of only seeing the bad in people and within ourselves, and the sense of, well, frigate, I'm just out for me and he's out for you, and that's the way it is. You know, people are just that way. So these are tended to be short contemplations, and so I'd like to do each of them separate, invite you to participate. They'll be about 5 or 6 minutes long. So I'll ring a gong, and I ask you to really contemplate, to see the arising of how tempting it is just to give up in that nihilistic way. And then they'll ring the gong, and we can contemplate for an equally short session, just looking personally at that temptation to want to be saved, wanting everything to be okay, and how each of those kind of separates us out from something that is important and could be helpful going forward. So without ado, I'll ring the gong, and they have about 5 or 6 minutes. And the idea of this session altogether is to give time to kind of look at our experience and question our own experience, and understand how powerful these poles are, and how we're led into them and away from what's real and raw and true. So I'll ring the gong, and then I'll ring the gong again in about 5 minutes. I just take a moment just to settle, because I really want us to examine what is that quality of distrust on one hand or naive trust on the other, to really get a sense of contrast between the nihilism and the eternalism. So, in the same way as we're thinking about nihilism and kind of reflecting on the temptation of nihilism, for the second short contemplation, I'd like to turn the attention to contemplation of this wishful thinking side of things, the eternalistic, everything is going to be okay. Someone will somehow save us. Somehow there'll be some magical technological breakthrough or spiritual savior, or however you want to think of it. So that quality of negative cynicism, nihilistic quality, it's almost sometimes feel like to survive in this crazy world, you just have to distrust everyone. You have to have your armor on all the time and your guns loaded. Is that the only way to survive in the harshness of things? Or is the only way to get through it is to create some kind of fantasy world that seems to be not in that system, that everything's fine within whatever bubble that we can create, whether faith tradition or community or whatever we might think of, or theory of things, and get all romantic about how we should be trusting all the time and loving and kind and all that kind of thing. So that's kind of laying the ground, I suppose, to think about those tendencies within us. They're not outside of us, like theories outside, they're part of us. So I wanted to talk a little bit about my journey and thinking about all this. So I have a quote. I have a few quotes in this discussion, and they're all from this upcoming book. And this is a short quote to start with. And it goes like this. At this point, to understand basic spirituality, it is absolutely necessary to go along with a cynical attitude of questioning everything, not necessarily in an intellectual, logical, or metaphysical way, but experientially. Taking that approach is extremely important. So I could pull quotes from all over the place on this same message of Trungpa Rinpoche over and over said, we have to question everything. But how does that, relate to this totally negative, nihilistic kind of a cynical attitude? So I started thinking about questioning that and questioning the questioning, you could say, which is kind of strange. And I started thinking that in my experience, I do a lot of work with words and the way Trungpa Rinpoche would talk, and he never used words casually, ever, as far as he used words with great care, and he often used words that pointed back to original meanings. He was very keen on word origins and usages and things. So I started looking into the word cynicism. I had thought it might have a clue to some of the way he valued what he called cynicism. So the first thing I found out, which is kind of interesting, is that it comes from the Greek word like a dog, originally, cynic, like a dog, like canis, I suppose, the Latin is similar. I thought, oh, that's very interesting. And so then I started reading about the school of cynicism, which I'd forgotten about since I was in college. And it was very interesting in the intersection with some of the Buddhist traditions and viewpoints. So I'll talk a little bit about that and tie it in, hopefully. But the basic premise, this is very simplified, obviously, but basic premise of the cynicism school was to live in agreement with nature, to be in harmony with nature. And it was founded by a student of Socrates, but maybe the most famous in this school was a guy, Diogenes. I love this story. He lived in a jar. Diogenes lived in a jar at an intersection. It must have been just a small hut or something, but they were total kind of radicals, and they rejected the trappings of what at the time their version of capitalism, capitalist society. They rejected wealth, power, fame, and the obsession with those that people had. And they led simple lives, like street people, bums, wandering in the street. They were considered to be kind of weird, as you can imagine. They wandered the streets and they begged. very much like the early monastic Buddhist students or monks and nuns did. And they basically had a rejection of conventional manners. And they had this kind of a sort of a freedom of the street and the simplicity and the cutting through kind of the BS of, what we're fed as what's important in life, which is to, get money and power and fame and fortune, and then spend all our life struggling to get all those things. And they questioned all of that. And that kind of a questioning, positive cynicism, is that really how we want to live our lives? Is that really what matters when it gets right down to it? And I think people have been sort of thinking about some of these things, especially during the lockdown and whatnot, sort of have an interruption of the momentum just to focus on these kind of things. The cynics were also known for being skewering pretension, cutting through pretension. And that's very much obviously a part of the training that we have received as well, of the danger of pretension and the kind of unsatisfactory quality of a shallow life where you just follow along the rules of your society. You don't think about them, you don't really question them, so nothing changes, just to buy in and are complicit in a system that's doesn't wake people up, but keeps them asleep, and doesn't nurture people, but keeps people downtrodden in a certain way. So there was that sense of a different kind of virtue and a kind of moral freedom that only comes from not being caught in a cycle of desire. And I think it reminded me as well of what there's a tradition of the wandering realized beings in India called the Mahasiddhas, who also were many times were street people leading disrespectable lives in many ways, but having inner awakening and inner realizations that came with questioning what their way they were brought up, or what they were told was how they should spend their lives, this brief times on this planet. So the cynicism school, like a dog, there's also overlap there. There's a lot of talk in the Dharma of being like an old dog. Like an old dog is considered to be like you're at ease in a certain way. You're not trying to impress anyone. You're just who you are deeply, and with nothing to prove, I suppose. No one to impress, no one to attack, no one to try to attract. Sort of a lone dog or old dog. Finally, kind of an out breath, and whew, like an old dog. I love old dogs. So, cynicism. So you could say, hang on a second. We could see, well, okay, if you're questioning everything, he said also questioning not intellectually, but experientially. That was interesting too, what is experiential questioning. And so that also was very provocative to me. It's that sense of testing through your own experience, which sometimes I think has limits, because there's a lot of things that can be experienced that we haven't experienced necessarily. But there is that sense of whether something is relevant at a deep, personal, embodied level of our own experience. Is connected with the idea of blind faith, not getting caught in blind faith, wishful thinking, but really working with what you read, what you hear, what teachers say, and not taking anything just because it's said doesn't mean it's true. As it said, doesn't mean it's relevant to you or helpful to you. So there's a sense of really working with the teachings, working with the Dharma, working with the practice, questioning yourself as in particular, questioning, what your own pretension, and questioning if you can find a quality that's questions in a way that moves things forward, and questioning in a way that undercuts, you could say, your own pretensions and your own fixed views, and leaves you in a fresher, better state, I suppose you'd say. So I have another quote I wanted to add on the cynicism side of things, and it's very similar. It said, quote, "The first step for you as a student is to sharpen your intellect and not buy anything that is presented without questioning. To wake yourself up, cynical thinking and critical questioning are extremely important. Otherwise, you are completely helpless. You are just being fed through an intravenous system." So that kind of lapping up the wisdom in kind of a non-aware fashion, or actually you could circle back and when you're receiving teachings, you could be receiving teachings from the nihilistic side of things, like this, I'm going to get the goods. This is a transactional thing, and I'm just going to get these teachings and then I'll have them and I can get ahead of someone else. Or the eternalistic naivete of saying, well, my life is just going to be transformed now that I sat for meditation for 20 minutes and met some great teacher. You can see these themes coming up over and over again, and the power of cynicism, positive cynicism, I'm calling it, is to bring you back. Okay, you read this, you did this practice, someone said that. Okay, so then what? What does that actually mean? How much do you really understand, and how much do you actually apply it in your life in any way that makes any difference? So I think we kind of progress on a path, so to speak, through this kind of questioning, where we just don't accept a superficial kind of a swimming along the surface of life, or the surface of teachings, but we're always digging deeper. So then you could say, all right, that's great, that's interesting. But then what is this thing about magic? Why would he have the two of them together, cynicism and magic? So I started thinking about that as well. And in the same way as the cynicism thing, there's the conventional usage of the term, and then the usage that draws back on some of the original meanings. So talk about magic a little bit, and then we can explore together through discussion or dialogue. So magic comes from an old Persian word, magus, and it's the same word as magi in the Bible, is that same word, magicians or magi. And that sparked something for me in terms of some of the readings and teachings I've received from Trungpa Rinpoche, in that many times, oddly, many times he's referred to the Star of Bethlehem and talked about the three magi and the Star of Bethlehem, and finding this star and going on this journey through this Star of Bethlehem. And he used that as a metaphor for a lot of different things. So there's a sense of that of the magi as more like holy explorers, not just sorcerers or doing magic tricks, but sorcerer in the deeper sense of a kind of spiritual adepts of some sort. So Obviously, in the ordinary sense, when we think of magic shows and card tricks, and they can turn a stone into a peach, or can do all sorts of weird tricks. But in this sense, I don't think that's the point, is that in any way is to learn a bunch of tricks and deceive ourselves and others. But there's a sense of this dropping into a kind of journey. You say the Magi dropping into a journey that's not nihilistic and not eternalistic. It's dropping into an intuitive sense of things and trusting that intuitive kind of knowledge that we all can touch into, but we can't touch into them within these extreme states. The extreme states of nihilism will never get way too cynical, or the romantic, dreamy, wishing for special savior to come and bop us on the head and project us right into awakened state of some sort. That will never work either. So the magic here is really at different realms. He's talked about magic in a lot of places, and he always says it's true magic doesn't go against natural laws of science. True magic doesn't really doesn't work like that. And sometimes he talked about that in terms of the story of Milarepa. You know, when it's a long story, I'll just give the punchline, so to speak. When Milarepa was in the middle of a heavy rain and hailstorm, was able to hide in a conch shell. And you could say, well, that's pretty magic trick. That seems like a real good magic trick to me. But the real punchline is that Milarepa never got smaller, and the conch shell never got bigger. That's the magic. So I'll leave that as one example. In some ways, our fascination with, you know, and our kind of weird things, kind of sense that we could just make everything change just because we want to. That's the magic powers that we have. Is that it's much more ordinary what he's talking about. There's is incredible power, but it's not that kind of power. So I wanted to read a couple of quotes to reflect on there, and then talk a little bit more, and then open things up for discussion. So the first quote here on magic, quote, "The most important point about magic is that it cannot happen in the realm of spiritual materialism. Magic can only take place when you begin to transcend your potential for egomania. It can only take place when there's no ground and no security. According to the Buddha, the highest magic, real definite magic, can only develop from a non-theistic approach." So it seems that, you know, in talking about finding a way to thread the needle between nihilism and eternalism, indicates that either of those two extremes is a way of seeking some kind of security, trying to predefine the situation. Things are going to be okay, or things are never going to be okay, depending on your choice of which extreme you're in at the moment. And that predetermination, that sense of just so much we want to know what's going on really, closes things down and closes us off to what is talked about here as magic, real definite magic. For that, we need to transcend our egomania, easier said than done. And we have to be able to settle within no ground, no security, no predetermined state. So it's a kind of an opening that comes from questioning those tendencies and whether they actually lead us anywhere positive. So I have a couple other short quotes here. The second one, going further in magic, goes like this, quote, "In the magical realm, there is enormous abundance of energy in constant supply. It just keeps going. If you approach magic at a non-materialistic level, it is at your disposal. You can relate with such magic directly, constantly. You can transcend karmic consequences because they don't make any difference to you. Magic is available to you and you can work with it." So that's an extremely provocative little sentence or little phrase. It's like if you're not trying to grasp it, it is at your disposal. If you weren't trying to grasp something outside ourselves, to feed ourselves, we become able to access incredible body of energy, but it can't force it and it can't get there from an ego perspective. And it's direct. And it says it's constant. So that's a provocative thing. Things don't seem constant generally. And we're not caught up in our karmic consequences, whether something makes us happy, something makes us sad, something makes us feel good, something makes us feel bad. What people think of us, they like us, they don't like us, etc. like that. We're not so caught up in all of that. It's less to prove, less territory to defend, less of a kingdom to create or manufacture. The kingdom of me, and I'm in the middle of it, yay. And then there's kind of the capper quote that I couldn't resist including because he really gets to the heart of it. And I think it's something that we all connect with, and we're connected to it through meditation practice in particular and through some of our training. But this is a further quote from Trungpa Rinpoche. And he's trying to explain, what magic is. Someone had, I think in the Q&A, someone says, can you give example or something? And then he goes, quote, "Somebody brought a chair on stage and set it up, and I walked over to it and sat on it. It's not particularly magical, but the beingness is magical, that I could be sitting on a chair." So that sense of whether the magic that we exist at all, the magic of a sense of just ordinary being, which we miss so much. We fall into just the functionality and the busyness of life. And it is so strange and weird that we exist at all. And it's so magical, this display that we're a part of, we're experiencing and we're co-creating and engaged in this very powerful, fleeting, ungraspable experience, which is groundless, but it's increasingly or incredibly energetic kind of state. So magic, cynicism, question, and not allowing ourselves to fall into a prepackaged view or get on some track where we just are on our track, cynicism track or the eternalism track, and the magic just goes poof, disappears. There's no space for it. We've closed in. We've closed the doors and the windows, and there we are with our own little self. So these are kind of the things that came up with me about it. But in particular, I've been thinking a lot of just how hard it is not to fall into cynicism and not to fall into eternalism. And I think it's been heightened by the overwhelming number of kind of challenging issues coming at us right and left, top and bottom, all over the place. It's hard to just not seek one of these escape valves to stay with the experience and be able to face our lives and face our situation. And questioning more and more how we come to be the way we are and what we are, questioning what has supported and sustained that. What has supported and sustained so much is things that we would prefer not to look at. So much hidden layers throughout our society and the world. All of it needs to be questioned. So that's what I had to start with. And what I really like is to have some dialogue with all of you. Please, you're welcome to send questions or comments or just stories, whatever you'd like, via the chat or raising your hands, and Mary will be kind of the coordinator or the director.
Why don't I just say sort of a reaction that I had, which will give people a chance to get their fingers on their keyboards or something. When we were doing the contemplations, I felt like either I couldn't really go for either one of them. It was sort of like, even thinking about I thought of some really horrible people, like the majority leader of the Senate or something, but even a lot of the sort of most horrible people, I kept thinking, well, but they think they're doing good, they're not just in it for themselves or something. And so anyway, and then on the eternalism one, I just kept going, who are you kidding? It's not all going to get better. It's, like, who would even think that? So I just wonder if, how, I'm sure that our feelings of eternalism and nihilism are much more subtle. Like we have ways that we get caught in not trusting or kind of looking for an escape hatch. So I wonder if you could maybe talk a little bit about the subtle ways that we engage in eternalism or nihilism.
Yeah, my initial thought was to look within ourselves, not to think about people who are one way or the other, because I think we're both. And at least I recognize those qualities within myself at many levels. The sense of nothing is going to work. Why bother? That situation is not trustworthy, and no matter what, one person can't do that much anyway. It's not going to make one bit of difference. So just just take care of me, myself, and I, and forget about the various problems around and about. That's one kind of kind of stream that sometimes I swim in and say, screw it, who needs it? And other times I'm sort of thinking, I have this tendency to, well, like kind of like you were saying, like I say, everybody's trying their best, and they're, they may be just, people may be confused, but they're at least trying and all that, um, and some kind of naive sense that I'm actually going to change anyone's mind about anything, that a sense of, I mean, of course, there are ways, trustworthy people, and there are people that wisely one would distrust, but there's a different level than just that, I think.
So Arthur Dion has a experience of the contemplation that he'd like to share, and then we have a question about Milarepa. So Arthur, do you want to share?
Sure, thanks. Thank you, Judy. It's great to see you.
Hey, Arthur. Good to see you.
Hi. I found the talk in general and the contemplations surprisingly useful. I thought I knew what nihilism, and eternalism were, and I thought I had a sense of those ideas, but somehow you're asking us to contemplate it in the way you did. And especially your lead-in, which mentioned Machiavellianism, which is definitely a part of my arsenal for dealing with problems, made me realize that I have this sort of embattled, deeply distrustful, very defensive attitude, prepared and ready to go at my disposal. Mm-hmm. Not that I'm there all the time or using it all the time, but it's just really all set up and in good working order, and I can snap into it as soon as I feel threatened in a certain way. And that was shocking, because I thought I had more perspective on my behavior than that. So that was really appreciated. And by the same token, I think the flip for me was this disposition to think that people are, especially people I love, people I know, people are going to behave wonderfully. They're really going to rise to every occasion. They're going to treat me and everyone else well. They're really going to fulfill their potential. They're going to be as terrific as they could possibly be. And I can see them. I tend to see people, being everything they could be. And it suddenly struck me that that was the mirror image of the embattled perspective that I carry around, and helped create the hurt, pain, and disappointment with someone I expected to be, borderline beatific. It turned out to have a treacherous aspect. So that was just really surprising to see all of that. And I wanted to acknowledge it and thank you and give you the feedback that this seems to be working on some level.
There's a question to hear a little more about Milarepa hiding in the conch, and also a question from Mary Jo Duffy about between the two polarities of eternalism and nihilism is a middle ground, and what are the qualities of that middle ground, and perhaps what is also the practice of that middle ground?
Maybe I'll do that one first. And the qualities are what is said in the quote, groundlessness. Groundless. No security, no ground, less egomania. Those are the qualities. And I don't know what the practice is other than to, I think the practice is described here as questioning. Questioning when we, or training ourselves, I suppose, to notice more when, as we fall into those patterns that are closed in, pre-packaged by whatever feels comfortable us and experience over time. Like, for instance, I'm going to say something that probably a little controversial in a way, but sometimes I have the experience, and I say, it's so disappointing. I have friends and I have been practicing for all this time, and we're still the same jerks as we were when we started. That sense of that's eternalism. I think suddenly, everyone's going to be, saintly, like Arthur was saying, had to grow wings or something because they encountered the Dharma and they did some meditation practice. And you could notice that, or you could go to the cynical extreme there and say, screw it, throw out the whole thing. It didn't fulfill my eternalistic desire for, everybody become a saint. It didn't fulfill my need to get out of the human realm and pretend I'm in some other realm, and that people have to fulfill my needs to be the saintly ones that I want, or to be able to prove. You see, this is really worthwhile because you can see how nice people are all the time, but they're not necessarily. So that's what I would say. And it's kind of giving yourself a break in a way, and giving others a break. You're not putting people on pedestals, and you're not putting people down. You're not giving up on people, but you're not unrealistic about, what we're dealing with, just trying to get through life in humans as human beings. So that was that. And then there was another question about the Milarepa story.
Yeah.
Well, it's a long story, so I'll give this. I won't do the whole long story because that would take up all the rest of the time. But if you read the Milarepa book, you can read about it. But it's basically a classical story where Milarepa and his student Rinpoche. I love Rinpoche because he's always messing up and getting in trouble, and he's the heart son of Milarepa. And Milarepa was always sort of testing him in different ways and challenging him in different ways and putting him in situations that freak him out. And anyway, in this particular story, they're crossing a big open plain, and they've been dragging along a conch shell, which Milarepa made Rinpoche pick up, and as though their conch shells lying around Tibet. But anyway, Rinpoche thinks Milarepa is, too eccentric and weird, and why you have to drag her along a conch shell? Why do I have to do this? It's embarrassing, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so they're walking along, because they're always walking around, because Milarepa was a forest yogi kind of guy. And then there was a gigantic hailstorm, and there was no shelter. There were no trees, like in much of Tibet. And so Rinpoche was getting pelted with hail and rain, and he doesn't know where Milarepa is. He's looking, what happened to him? And then Milarepa says something. He's in the conch shell, so perfectly dry and cozy, and that's the story. And then the explanation in the songs of Milarepa is that the Milarepa was not smaller, the conch shell was not larger. That's pretty much it. Don't ask me to explain that. Just the way it was. And there was a third thing I think I might have missed.
I think I think that's all we have in the chat right now. I don't know if anyone has their hand raised or if something else has come to mind.
I wanted to share just experientially. when I was contemplating on the first time, I reflected on my day and how I, at one point in my day, I had this sudden feeling of panic, and it was brief. It was, it wasn't lasting, but it was brief and intense. And also at the dinner table, how I had this incredible sense of ease. And within that ease, I was questioning myself. And this happens to me with, off the cushion, if I'm feeling joyful and in the strife of life, I sort of go, how is it that I can feel joyful? How can I be at ease in this, mess here? This is unbelievable. So anyways, that felt like the magic.
Mm. Mm.
Francis Patno has a question.
Yeah. Hi, Judy. How you doing?
Hi. How are you? Oh, there you are.
In the dark. Slipping off into nihilism here a little bit. No, I'm just kidding. I've been reading a lot about form is emptiness, emptiness is form. And I think in some ways what came up for me was just that a lot of what you're talking about in terms of magic and, cynicism is kind of, there's a quality that seems to be rooted to some degree in experiencing what that means in terms of, emptiness being nothing and form being permanent, right? Which is, we get ourselves into trouble when we do that. So I just was wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit more into that, because it seems like there's a depth to what you're saying in terms of not only just understanding it, but how you live that,
Mm-hmm. That's interesting connection. In some ways, I could see the emptiness side being tending towards the nihilism.
Sure.
In form, that sense of things are more solid than they really are, ism.
Right.
And, in terms of how that plays out in life, I think I think most of us, we may have tendency towards one more than the other, but I think we can feel ourselves flip-flopping between those sometimes very rapidly, and just wanting to land somewhere and working with that wanting to land somewhere side of things, to me is a practice, and noticing that what are we really trying to do? Why do we need that?
Mm.
Why do we need to land somewhere? Why don't we?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's it. And at the same time, I think that kind of interplay is getting to a subtle level that you're talking about, where the form is not different than emptiness. Emptiness not different than form.
Right.
Yet it's not that we're trying to reject one, because when we try to reject one, we end up with the other.
Right.
And so that's the flip-flopping. So it's something other than rejecting. So this questioning thing is slightly different than rejecting. It's not trying to get rid of, but it's almost kind of creating the kind of the emptiness all the way through, in a
Right.
way.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I understand it.
Thank
So
you.
there, are you done, Francis?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
There's
Thank
I think a related question from Annie McMullen saying, during the contemplation, she thought of bodhicitta and wondered how that sense of basic goodness might relate. Is that perhaps cutting through the nihilism, bodhicitta or basic goodness?
Mm-hmm. No, that's good. Annie's calling in from New Zealand. Yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting one as well, in terms of how does basic goodness not fall into the eternalism side of things, of a namby-pamby view, everybody's nice, everybody's good. that level, very relative, sense of things to a more basic level. That's not, again, it's sort of, what is that space of groundlessness and non-security that's between the two extremes? What is the tone or color or tone of that? It is the bodhicitta. So it's essential part of this middle ground. I think maybe separates that kind of questioning from just cynical questioning, where you never trust anything. Like Eileen was saying, not necessarily trust your experience of well-being, even, that kind of other kind of questioning, is that sense of questioning you're questioning out of love, out of friendship. You're not questioning out of, like Arthur was referring to, this battle mentality or defeat or, conquer. It's questioning from true inquisitiveness, a true kind of spark of interest, taking interest in the experience to learn from it. And so you're not trying to remodel, if you're feeling nihilistic, you're feeling more eternalistic, and the idea isn't to beat yourself up and say I shouldn't be experiencing, but to have an inquisitiveness, positive inquisitiveness. What is that about? What is that doing for me? Is it leading to arousing of greater friendship and kindness, and or not? Is it penning me in or opening me out?
And maybe last question from Debbie Storms. Is the concept of or belief in reincarnation a form of eternalism?
Depends on how you interpret that. I mean, I guess the conventional thinking is that, good old you gets to have a whole series of lives. And that, I think, is a kind of eternalistic idea. But the notion of the arising and kind of the cycle of arising or birth and death, the sense of that being an ongoing pattern, is not necessarily eternalistic from my perspective. Eternalism is interpreting reincarnation as kind of meaning you don't ever have to die. And rebirth, as it's usually presented, of course, you die over and over again, and every minute, actually every instant, there's arising and dissolving. The nature of things all the way through. That's a little bit different interpretation.
Well, I think we're all speechless. Other than to say thank you so much. And I really look forward to this book, but also just it's great to sort of have a opportunity to really look at our ways that we look for escape hatches from groundlessness. And I think it's just, particularly during these times, so helpful to be reminded to remember bodhicitta, basically. So thank you very much. It's great to have everybody here. And we have another Friday Night Talk next Friday and the Friday after that. So I'll let people know about that when they get the recording. And if you are new to the Boston Shambhala Center and this is your first program and you'd like to know more about things that we're doing, go to our website and sign up to get our emails, because, you know, we've got all kinds of things going on here. Now that there's Zoom, no one has to be in the actually travel. We can have teachers from everywhere and have Judy from Colorado and participants from Auckland, New Zealand, and it's fabulous. So thank you all very much. Thank you, Judy.
Thank you. Thank you to the Shambhala Boston. And it's so nice to see all of you. You all shrank quite a lot since you're now only about one each high now. But it's so nice to see you and to see some of the new faces. I can't see you all at once. I have to go back and forth. But it's an honor to be here with all of you. And these times do bring up uncertainty and impermanence very vividly, and also fixed views and escape hatches very vividly. So it's worthwhile exploring that and joining that with your practice, you know, as good grounds for positive cynicism.
Thank you, Judy.
We dedicate the merit. Do we usually do that at your talks?
It's up to whatever speaker. Let's dedicate the merit.
By this merit, may all attain
Missions
may
may
defeat the enemy wrongdoer, from the wrong way of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. See you somewhere, another box.